why did it change whenever it changed? So I gave you last week, so remember we distinguished last week between, I showed you the demand curve. And I mentioned that the demand curve shows all different quantities demanded at every given price. And so when price, whatever good we're talking about, pounds of apples, for example, when the price of pounds of apples changes, you get a different quantity demanded of apples. So lower price, people are willing to buy a higher quantity. They demand more. A higher price, get a lower quantity demand. But it's also true that there are things that can change other than price that will cause the amount that someone wants to buy to change. There are 6 of these other things. We call them the determinants of demand. I gave you 5 last week. I'm going to give you the 6th and final determinant of demand today. But in order to do that, we have to now distinguish between 2 different kinds of demand curves. One we call an individual demand curve. Demand curve, think of it as your demand for apples, or your demand for root beer, or my demand for health care. An individual, a person, a flesh and blood person. One person's demand for something. An individual demand curve. That's distinct from a market demand curve. A market demand curve is demand of 2 or more people. So we can speak, we're talking about an individual demand curve of your demand for apples, you, or my demand for apples, me. Or we can talk of the demand for apples among people who are affiliated with George Mason University, the demand for apples in Fairfax County, the global demand for apples. Anytime we're talking about more than one person's demand for something, we call that market demand as opposed to individual demand. And the demand curve that reflects that demand from more than one person, that's a market demand curve. Let me show you how that works. I'm going to use the dot cam to do that. I'm going to draw a separate I don't know who designed this classroom, but I hate that person. It's so much more difficult, so much easier to draw with a whiteboard, or even be able to draw on the screen. Instead, I have to use this dinky little dot cam. So, let's say we're talking about your and my demand curve, demand for apples. So let's say this is my demand curve for apples. Let's say it's the case that if the price of apples is $5 a pound, I'm willing to buy 2 pounds of apples a month. If the price of apples is $3 a pound, I'm willing to buy 3 pounds of apples a month. Let's draw your demand curve. You like apples better than I do, so this is your demand curve. At a price of $5 a pound, you're willing to buy 3 pounds of apples. At the price of $3 a pound, you're willing to buy 7 pounds of apples. So we can add these 2 together. So if we talk about the demand curve for me and you together, it's a market demand curve. It would be this demand curve, EM for market. So at $5 a pound, I'm willing to buy 2 pounds, you're willing to buy 3. So the total demand in the market is 5 pounds. Or it's not quite, it's not to scale. At a price of $3 a pound, I'm willing to buy 3 pounds, you're willing to buy 7 pounds, and the total amount is 10 pounds. So when we the greater it's common sense, the greater the number of people who are in the market to buy some good, the greater will be the demand for that good. The larger the quantities that will be purchased at any given price for that good. The fewer the number of people, obviously, the lower the demand. So we depict that. I did this last week, but we'll show you again. I don't know what that yellow thing is. Oh, that's the wrong one. You depict that this way. So, if we start with the D curve, the middle demand curves further to the right represent higher demands. At any given price, the quantity that's demanded is greater on demand curves further to the right. Demand curves further to the left represent lower demands, because at any given price, the amount demanded is less than at demand curves further to the right. So for a market demand curve, the more people we have in the market, the further out is the demand curve. If you're the manager of the giant supermarket behind campus, and you open the newspaper in the morning, and you read in the newspaper that everybody in the local area is moving out, you're upset. You're upset because you understand that the number of people who are demanding your services, you supply retailing grocery services, the number of people who are supplying your services is falling. The demand for what you sell, what you supply, is less. You're unhappy about that. It's not because any of the individuals changed their taste, had their incomes changed, not that the price of substitutes or complementary goods changed. They're just moving out. So the number of people in the market changes. If more people move in, the demand curve shifts out. So if we're talking, the first 5 determinants of demand, you can think of them first as an individual's determinant of demand. The 6th determinant of demand is the number of buyers in the market, the number of demanders. And the rule is the greater the number of demanders, the higher is demanding, the further to the right is the demand curve. The fewer the number of buyers, the lower the demand. The further to the left is the demand curve. Anytime any one or more of those 6 determinants of demand change, the demand curve itself shifts position. It moves either to the right or to the left, depending upon which of those 6 change and how it changes. A change in demand, let me remind you, is never, ever, ever, ever caused by a change in the price of the good in question. So if this is apples, a change in the price of apples will never cause the demand for apples to change. It's not going to cause the demand curve for apples to move out or in. A change in the price of apples will cause a movement along the demand curve. It will cause a change in quantity demand. But anything else that will cause the amount of something, apples in this case, that people want to buy to change, other than the change in the price of apples, is depicted by a shift of the demand curve, right or left, depending on what changes and how. Any questions about that? I'm not done yet with demand. When we get to supply, it won't take as long, thank goodness. But demand is especially important. Let me show you another graph. Those are 2 demand curves. So we have price again, the vertical axis, with quantity per period of time on the horizontal axis. We have demand curves D1 and D2. They're both perfectly fine demand curves. Each of those demand curves satisfies the law of demand, which is simply showing a negative or inverse relationship between price and quantity demand. Lower the price, the higher the quantity demand, higher the price, the lower the quantity demand. That's true along both demand curves. But obviously they're different. D1 has a steeper slope than does D2. Let me pause for a moment And it's usually good to know more math than less, but not always. Those of you who know a little bit of math, you're going to start thinking in a little bit, what I'm about to talk about is slope, not. So when I start talking about what I'm about to talk about, don't mistake it for being the slope of the demand curve. It's related to the slope, it's not the same thing. If you don't understand what I just said, don't worry about it. All of that, because it's not slope. But clearly the slope of these two curves differ. What the law of demand tells us is only the direction in which a change in price affects quantity demand. All we know is that whatever direction price changes, quantity demanded changes in the opposite direction. The law of demand does not tell us by how much. It does not tell us the extent to which a change in price causes quantity demanded to change. When price falls, does it cause quantity demanded to change by a lot or by a little? When price rises, does it cause quantity demanded to change by a lot or by a little? The law of demand doesn't tell us that. What we're going to talk about for the next few minutes does talk about that phenomenon. We're going to talk now about price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand, or simply elasticity of demand. This is the something has to be. Did I mention it? So we talk about the elasticity of demand. Elasticity is a general word. It refers to how responsive something is. When something is really responsive, we say it's elastic. In fact, we have a material that is so responsive to the touch, we even call it elastic. It's in your underwear and your socks. It's very responsive to the touch. You put your thumb between your waist and your underwear, you push out a little bit, it goes out, take the thumb away, it goes right back. It's really elastic. Same thing with your socks. Imagine having your underwear lined with concrete. It wouldn't be very elastic, not very sensitive to the touch. That same principle applies here. We want to get at how sensitive is quantity demanded to a change in the price of the good. The more sensitive it is, the more elastic is demand. So, let me put these other two demand curves back up for just a moment. Let's say we start at a price of $10. The price is $10. It's supposed to be 10. The price is $10. Let's say that on both these demand curves, quantity demand is 100. Obviously, if the price falls, let's say it falls to 8. We know that quantity demand is going to rise. We don't know about how much. Along D2, it's going to rise, let's say, I make these numbers up, to 135. Let's say along D1, it rises to 111. In both cases, we get a fall in price from 10 to $8. In both cases, we get an increase in quantity demanded, but we get a larger increase in quantity demanded along demand curve D2 compared to along demand curve D1. So we say demand curve D2 is more elastic than is demand curve D1. Along demand curve D2, quantity demanded is more sensitive to a price change. We get a bigger bang for the buck, figuratively speaking, when price changes along D2 than we do along D1. Price changes along D1, quantity demanded goes up only by 11, which is 11% of 100. Quantity demanded changes along D2 by 35% of what it was before. We get a bigger response along D2. The more horizontal the demand curve, the more elastic is that demand curve. The more vertical the demand curve, the less elastic or more inelastic is the demand curve as we describe it. I'm not even close to being done with elasticity. I mentioned on day one that there's no math in this class. There's only one equation that that I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you that now. And you'll see that to call it an equation is glorified. It's not really an equation. So let's look at the techniques I've already put it up. So we can measure. We actually have a measure of the elasticity of demand. And that's the equation. That's as much math as we get in this class. We predict elasticity of demand with a capital script E, stands for elasticity. And that measure is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. So it's a percentage sign. That's a Greek letter delta, which is the common symbol for change. And that's quantity demanded. That's the numerator, percentage change in quantity demanded, divided by the percentage change in price. The only thing we care about is whether or not E is greater than or less than 1. We don't care about the actual number. Is it greater than 1 or is it less than 1? We don't even care about, in other words, is the numerator greater than the denominator or is the numerator less than the denominator? The only thing we care about is percentage change in quantity demanded greater than the percentage change in price, or is it less than the percentage change in price? I'm going to just give you the language and I'll give you some examples. So we say, if elasticity, if E is greater than 1, if the numerator is greater than the denominator, if the percentage change in quantity demand is greater than the percentage change in price, we call that, we say demand is elastic over that price change range. Again, I'll give you examples. So if E is greater than 1, we're always looking at a price change range. Starting price, new price, that's the price change range. And that change in price is going to bring about a change in quantity demanded. We know the direction, we just don't know the magnitude. If the magnitude of that change in quantity demanded is greater than, in percentage terms, the percentage change in price, we say that demand is elastic over that price change range. The numerator is greater than the denominator. If instead, if E is less than 1, we say demand is inelastic over that price change range. The numerator is less than the denominator. The percentage change in quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in price. This, I know to you now, seems rather academic, really boring. So what? So a lot, as we'll see, particularly later in the semester. A huge amount in terms of whether demand is elastic or inelastic. You'll get to see a little bit of that in just a moment. But these are just the rules. So once again, we have this equation. E is defined as percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. All we care about is whether E is greater than or less than 1. Somebody may ask, what if it's equal to 1? We're going to ignore that. It's called unitary elasticity, curiosity. I'm not paying attention to it. But whether it's greater than or less than 1. If it's greater than 1, if the percentage change in quantity demand is greater than the percentage change in price, we say demand is elastic over that price change rate. If it's less than 1, if the numerator is less than the denominator, if the percentage change in quantity demand is less than the percentage change in price, we say that demand is inelastic over that price change range. So let me give you some examples. So here's one. Oh gosh, I did this stuff. Get this thing to narrow down. Huh? Let's see if I can zoom out. Try raising the camera. Oh, that's over there. There we go. Look at that, magic. All right. Better. Okay. So, the screen shows the same thing. So here's the demand curve. Let the first price be $10, And when the price is $10, quantity demand is 100. Price is going to fall to 8. When price falls to 8 on this demand curve, quantity demanded goes from 100 to 150. That's all we need to satisfy the law of demand. Lower price, higher quantity demand. Is this demand curve elastic or inelastic over this price change range? Well, let's do the formula. Remember, the formula is E equals percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. The percentage change in quantity demanded is 50. Quantity demanded went from 100 to 150, changed by 50. 50 is what percent of 100?
50%.
50. So we get 50 in the numerator. Percentage change in price is what? It went from 10 to 8, it changed by $2. 2 is what percent of 10?
20.
20. So we get 20 in the denominator. 50 over 20 is greater than 1. That's all we need to know. So we can say confidently, on a demand curve, in which when the price falls from 10 to 8, and the quantity demanded then rises from 100 to 150, that this demand is elastic over the price change range 10 to 8. A relatively small change in price, percentage-wise, 20%, gave a relatively large change in quantity demanded, 50%. Let me give you another example. But still, on this demand curve, when the price is $10, quantity demanded is 100. As before, we're going to have the price fall by 20% from 10 to $8. But on this demand curve, when price falls, quantity demanded rises only from 100 to 105. Again, perfectly consistent with the law of demand. Lower price, higher quantity demand. But obviously, if it goes from 100 to 105, that's a lot less bang for the buck, for the price cut buck, than if quantity demanded goes from 100 to 150. So we've already seen that when price falls from 10 to 8, that's a 20% cut in price. So the denominator is 20. What is the numerator in this case? 5%. Quantity demanded changed from 100 to 105, changed by 5. 5 is 5% of 100. That shows easy numbers. So we get 5 in the numerator, 20 in the denominator. 5 over 20 is less than 1. That's all we need. That's all we care about. So we say on this demand curve, over the price change range, $10 to $8, quantity, this demand is inelastic. And over that price change range. Again, you're probably thinking, well, so what? And again, I'll say so plenty. But let me now start to give you some insight into why I say so plenty. If you're uncomfortable, as I know many of you probably are, with percentages, let me tell you another way to determine if the demand curve is elastic or inelastic. TR does not stand for a dead American president. It stands for total revenue. Total revenue is a really simple concept. It's simply the amount of money that a business or a seller takes in when that seller sells something, which is the same as the amount that buyers pay for that thing. The total amount of money forked over from buyers to sellers. Total revenue equals price times quantity. I'm not going to put it up again, but if you think back to the previous demand curve, when both of them, when price was $10, quantity demanded was 100, so total revenue was 1,000. Sellers were selling 100 units. We're selling each of those 100 units at $10 a piece. You multiply 10 times 100, you get 1,000. That's how much cash the sellers took in when they were charging a price of $10, which is also then the total amount of money that buyers paid during that period for this good. By the way, total revenue is not profit. Profit is total revenue minus cost. We haven't said a thing about cost. Yep.
Would you expect us to know both methods for the exam? Or
You only need to know one.
difference?
It's up to you. Whatever you do better. I'll give you the total revenue method in just a moment. I think the total revenue method is a little more intuitive, but it's up to you. But I'm not done explaining it yet. So it's not profit. So if price is 10, selling 100 units, total revenue is 1,000. If it costs that seller, so let's say we're talking about one seller, if it costs that seller $1 million to produce those 100 units, the person's making a huge loss. If instead it costs that seller only $10 to produce those 100 units, the seller's making a profit. Total revenue is not profit. It's just total revenue. And it's simply price times quantity. Very easy. Here's the rule. If total revenue moves in the same direction as the change in price, demand is inelastic over that price change rate. If total revenue moves in the opposite direction as the change in price, demand is elastic over that price change rate. So we know that when price changes, it's going to cause quantity demand to change. So it's going to go from one P times Q to another P times Q. If the the second P times Q for operators will always be different from the first P times Q. If we're talking about a price fall and total revenue falls, then price and total revenue in that case move in the same direction. So we would say that demand is inelastic over that price change rate. If instead price falls and total revenue rises, we would say that demand is elastic over that price change rate. Let's look at the other two, those previous two demand curves that I showed you, and look at the total revenue. Look at them with the total revenue. So we're going to start with price of 10. That's the first price. Quantity demand is 100, so total revenue is 1,000. Price falls from 10 to 8. What happens to total revenue? Naively, you might think, well, if price is falling, then it must be that the seller is going to take in less money. Not necessarily. In this case, it's not true. The price falls, the seller sells each unit at a lower price, but if the number of units sold because the price is low is so great, the number of additional units is so great, then the additional units will mean that total revenue rises and demand will be elastic over that price change rate. That's what happens here. When the price is 10, quantity demand is 100, total revenue is 1,000. Price falls to 8, total revenue rises to 1,200. 8 times 150 is 1,200. Total revenue goes up. Price falls, total revenue rises. Price and total revenue move in the opposite direction. So we say that, as we saw before with the equation, this demand is elastic over the price change range 10 to 8. $10 to $8. They work in reverse too. We start off with $8. We get a rise in price from 8 to 10. Total revenue would fall from 1,200 to 1,000. Now you start to see, if you're a seller, you care about whether your demand is elastic or inelastic over the price change rate. You care, because you care about what happens to the total amount of money you take in. Let's look at the other demand curve. Also, one that I showed earlier. We already saw with the other method that for this demand, it is inelastic over the price change range 10 to 8. You get a 20% up price. price and only causes 5% increase in quantity demanded. Let's use the total revenue method. Well, again, so price of 10, 100 units sold, $1,000 total revenue. Price falls from 10 to 8. What happens to total revenue? It falls from 1,000 to 840. Price falls, total revenue falls. It's sometimes the case when price changes, total revenue changes in the same direction. But it's sometimes the case when price changes, total revenue changes in the opposite direction. Depends upon whether demand is elastic or inelastic. In this case, because price and total revenue move in the same direction, we say demand is inelastic. Once again, if you're a seller, you care about what's going to happen to the amount of cash that comes into your register, flows into your bank account when you change your price. If that amount's going to go up, that's one thing. If it's going to go down, that's another thing. You can't determine just from that whether you should change your price or not. You have to look at costs. But it's clearly an important factor. You don't want to ignore it. So elasticity is important. If you're a consumer advocate, you care about elasticity. You care about the total amount that consumers are spending on the good. In this case, if price falls, the total amount consumers spend on the good also falls. I mentioned earlier that for those of you who know a little bit of math, or even a lot of math, not to confuse elasticity with slope. The two are related, obviously, but they're not the same thing. And I will show you what I mean by that now. And in going through this exercise, it's a little bit tedious. It will also drive home to all of you a better meaning of a better idea of what we mean by elasticity. It's just a very unusual demand curve, although it perfectly satisfies the law of demand. Downward sloping, lower price, higher quantity demanded. Higher price, lower quantity demanded. Here's how this demand curve works. This demand curve, for those of you who know math, has a slope of -1. If you don't know what I just said, don't worry about it. So, for this demand curve, if the price is 100, 1 unit is sold every period. If the price is 99, 2 units are sold every period. Price is 98, 3 units are sold. So the unique thing about this demand curve is when the price changes by $1, quantity demanded changes by 1 unit. Price goes up by $1, quantity demanded falls by 1 unit. Price falls by $1, quantity demanded rises by 1 unit. Price falls by $5, quantity demanded rises by 5 units. So we can. I'm not going to do it for all 100 units, but let's look at how elasticity works along this demand curve. Let's first do the equation method. E equals percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. Let's start with the price of 100. Price of 100, quantity demanded is 1. Price falls from 100 to 99. Quantity demanded rises from 1 to 2. When price falls from 100 to 99, what percentage change in price is that?
1%.
If you go into a store and someone says, we're selling for $100, I say, yeah, we're selling for you for 99. What percent discount do you get?
1.
1%. Right, so the percentage change in price, the numerator, 1. That's good. The denominator, percentage change in price, 1. Percentage change in quantity demanded, the numerator, it goes from 1 to 2. That's a 100% increase in quantity demanded. It doubles. You got 100 over 1. That's greater than 1. Demand is elastic over the price change range 100 to 99. Same too, by the way, it falls from 99 to 98. That's close to a 1% change in price. It's a little bit more. Quantity demanded rises from 2 to 3. That's a 50% rise in quantity demanded. Percentage change in price is less than percentage change in quantity demanded, so it's elastic. Let's go all the way down the demand curve. Let's get down to the price of $2, where quantity demanded is 99. And then price is going to fall from 2 to 1. And just as before, It's going to, that $1 cut in price is going to cause quantity demand to go up by 1 unit. Price falls from 2 to 1. That is a 50% cut in price. Price is cut in half. 50% discount. So the percentage change in price, the denominator is 50. The percentage change in quantity demanded is just over 1%. It goes from 99 to 100. Very tiny. And a huge price cut, 50%, causes a tiny change in quantity demand, just over 1%. Demand is inelastic over the price change range 2 to 1. Even though along this demand curve, what stays the same is that every $1 change in price causes a 1 unit change in quantity demand. That doesn't change. But elasticity changes along the demand curve. Up toward the top of the demand curve is elastic. Toward the bottom of the demand curve is inelastic. Let's do this using the total revenue method. Remember the total revenue method. The price of total revenue changing the same direction demand is inelastic. The price of total revenue changing the opposite direction demand is elastic. Price is 100. 1 unit is being sold. It's total revenue. 100. So 1 unit, you get $100 for it. Total revenue is $100. Pretty easy. You cut your price from 100 to 99. You sell 2 units. What's your total revenue? 198. Each unit you sold for a little bit less money, but you sold twice the number of units. So your price falls, but your total revenue goes up. Demand is elastic. Price and total revenue move in the opposite direction. Cut price, higher total revenue. If we go back from 99 to 100, we get a rise in price and a fall in total revenue. Price and total revenue moving in the opposite direction means that demand is elastic over that price change. Down here, if we start with a price of 2, and we're selling 99 units, well, total revenue is 198. The 99 units selling at $2 a piece, sellers are taking in $198 in sales revenue. Sellers cut their price from 2 to 1, 50% cut in price, huge. They sell only 1 additional unit. Total revenue falls from 198 to 100, selling 100 units at $1 a piece. Price and total revenue move in the same direction down here. When that happens, we say that demand is inelastic. Everyone so far? Okay. One more thing about elasticity. We're going to come back to it later. It has huge applications. I'll tell you this, when we get to supply, for a variety of reasons, the elasticity of supply is a thing, but it's nowhere near as big a thing as is the elasticity of demand. So that this is probably the most tedious part of the course. One part has to be the most tedious, that happens to be it. So now let's ask, we look at the determinants of demand, what causes the demand curve to be further out or further in. Now we can ask, what determines the elasticity of demand, whether the demand curve is relatively vertical, where a change in price causes relatively little in the way of changes in quantity demanded, or whether the demand curve is horizontal, more horizontal, where a change in price has a big impact on quantity demand. What determines the elasticity of demand? There are, we say, 3 determinants of the elasticity of demand. There are really only 2, but one part of one of them is so important, you kind of pull it out for special emphasis. These are no particular order, but one determinant of the elasticity of demand is the percentage of buyers' budget that is spent on the good. The percentage of buyer's budget, or a buyer's budget, I'm talking about one person, that is spent on the good. The rule is the following, and I'll give you some examples. The rule for this is the following. The greater is the percentage of a buyer's budget spent on the good, the more elastic is demand. The greater the percentage of a buyer's budget spent on the good, the more elastic is demand. The more will a change in price have a big impact, a bigger impact on quantity demand. The greater is the percentage of the buyer's budget spent on the good, the more elastic is demand. So imagine something, some small budget item that you buy. Chewing gum, toothpaste, some small budget item. Astonishes me how I bore people. I'm bored. It hurts my feelings. Some of you are going to hurt my feelings before the evening is out, I know. Anyway, comes with the job. I'm a boring person. Anyway, so think of a small budget item, chewing gum. So let's say there's a package of chewing gum. What kind of chewing gum you like? You've been buying it a certain amount every week. You go into the convenience store, walk down $1 for chewing gum, and you go into the convenience store one day and see the price of chewing gum is going up from $1 to $1.50. That's a pretty substantial percentage change in price, a 50% rise in the price of chewing gum. You don't like that, of course, but you like the chewing gum. It's quite possible it's not going to have a big impact on the amount of chewing gum you want to buy. You might buy a few packs less a year, but even as a student, you can afford a 50% increase in the price of a low budget item like chewing gum. You just, all right, I'll pay the $1.50 rather than $1. It's not going to have a big impact on your quantity demand. But imagine instead we're talking about a high budget item, like an automobile. Let's say you're saving up for that sexy new Toyota Camry. Costs $30,000. Finally have $30,000 saved up. You go to the Toyota dealership and you discover just as you get there that the price of the Camry is going up from $30,000 to $45,000. It's a 50% increase in price, just like with chewing gum. You don't go, keep that when it happens. All right, here's another 15 grand. That percentage change in price for a big ticket item is going to have a much larger impact on your willingness to buy than will a change in price on a small budget item. That's because if you're not spending a huge portion of your budget on an item, the intuition here is basically you can just afford to absorb that price increase if we're talking about a price increase. Likewise for a price decrease. You walk into this convenience store and you discover that the price of chewing gum is going down by 50%. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, you're happy about that, but the price of the chewing gum wasn't much of a constraint in buying it in the first place. So the price falls a little bit more, you're not going to stock up on a lot more chewing gum. Whereas, if you were thinking about buying that Camry, it's priced at $30,000, but that's just too much money. And then you discover next day it's on sale for $15,000, you may be much more likely to buy it. So the amount that you spend on something out of your budget has an impact on how sensitive you are to changes in the price of that thing. And again, the rule is the greater the percentage of your budget that you spend on something, the more elastic is your demand. Or put differently, the smaller the percentage of your budget that you spend on something, the less elastic or more inelastic is your demand for that. That make sense? Second determinant of demand is the number of available substitutes. The number of available substitutes for the good or service. The number of available substitutes. And the rule is the following. The larger the number of available substitutes, the more elastic is demand. The larger the number of available substitutes, the more elastic is demand. The more sensitive buyers are to changes in the price of that good. Here's an example. For most people, not everyone, but for most people, if you drink carbonated soft drinks. Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola are pretty much the same. They're not identical, but they're close. One brand of orange juice is pretty much the same as another brand of orange juice. Not identical. Minute Maid tastes a little bit different than Tropicana. Pretty much, it's orange juice. So let's say you kind of have a preference for Tropicana. You buy Tropicana past year. You walk into the supermarket and discover that the price of Tropicana has gone way up. But there's Minute Maid. The price of Minute Maid stays the same. You're probably going to shift to Minute Maid. You're not going to tolerate a higher price on Tropicana because you can easily switch to a close substitute. Price of Coca-Cola goes up. You switch to Pepsi. If you're a seller, you would what? Your ideal world is to not have, in the minds or eyes of consumers, is to not have a lot of substitutes for what you sell. You'd like to be able to raise your price and not have your quantity demanded fall by very much. If you're Mr. Coca-Cola or Ms. Coca-Cola, you would like nothing better than to be the only soft drink in town. No other soft drinks at all. Nothing else to drink. No water, nothing. You're going to drink something, you're going to hydrate yourself, it's got to be with Coca-Cola. Well, imagine in that world, Coca-Cola can raise the price. People have no choice. They want to drink something, they got to buy Coca-Cola. But if there's a lot of substitutes for it, you don't have to buy Coca-Cola. You can buy water, you can buy Pepsi-Cola, you can buy some store-bought cola, you can buy some fizzy water that's flavored like pumpkin and sassafras. Buy all kinds of different drinks. And so when Coca-Cola, in that world, when there are a lot of substitutes, raises its price, because consumers have a lot of options, they'll switch. And so the demand for Coca-Cola will be very elastic. The change in the price of Coca-Cola is going to have a big impact on the quantity demand of Coca-Cola. So again, the rule is the greater the number of substitutes, the more elastic is demand. The third determinant of the elasticity of demand, it's really a subset of number 2, but it's important enough to carve out and discuss independently. And that is time. T-I-M-E. Not, as one student thought many, many years ago, the verb, T-H-Y-M-E. Time. T-I-M-E. It's a true story, by the way. Why is time a determinant of elasticity? Why not partially the same? Time. And the rule is the following. The greater the amount of time that consumers have or buyers have to adjust to a price change, the more elastic is demand. The greater the amount of time that buyers have to adjust to a price change, the more elastic is demand. So over time, if price changes and stays changed, demand for some good, from your perspective, demand or down slope, demand is going to become more horizontal. An easy way to see this, imagine gasoline. So gasoline now selling at roughly $3.50, $3.60 a gallon, 89. So let's say you wake up in the morning and the price of gasoline is $12 a gallon, and you have reason to believe it's going to stay there. It's not a temporary price change. Well, what can you do immediately? Well, you got to get to work. You got to get to class. You promised Grandma to drive her to the doctor. You're not going to call Grandma and say, Grandma, I'm not driving you to the doctor. Gasoline's too expensive. You're on your own. You have obligations. So you suck it up. Even if you part feel, I wish I could like yesterday that I didn't. You go and you pay $12 per gallon for each gallon of gasoline. You're going to buy less gasoline, you drive a little bit less, but in the immediate short run, your quantity demand of gasoline will not change by as much as it will change over time. When the price goes up by that much, and I'm picking obviously extreme example to make the point clear, but it applies throughout. When the price goes up, you have more time to adjust. So if the price of gasoline goes up that much, you have time then to let's say when you decide to, people don't want to spend their time. You have time to move closer to work. You can't do that overnight. Wake up in the morning, price of gasoline is quadrupled. You can't move closer to work in a matter of hours. But when you realize that the price of gasoline is staying up that high, then you have more time to find a place close to work, so you have a smaller commute. Or you learn how to use public transportation. Before you bother to do it because you like driving, but now the price of gasoline is high. Maybe today you can't do it because you don't know how to use public transportation. So you drive, even though the price of gasoline is a lot higher. But when the price of gasoline stays much higher, you have more of an incentive to find substitutes. Move closer to work, buy a smaller car. Price of gasoline falls dramatically. Falls to 10 cents a gallon, as we discovered. It's going to increase the quantity of demand of gasoline, but over time it's going to increase it even more. People aren't going to throw away their Priuses overnight, but people will be less willing to buy Priuses in the future if gasoline falls to just a few pennies on the gallon and stays down there. People will be more willing to live out in the boondocks, far away from work. They can drive a long way, but it's okay. Gasoline's really cheap. So the greater the amount of time that consumers have to adjust to a price change, the more elastic is demand. Any questions about elasticity? All right, so that's demand. That's the consumer side of the market. I want to talk now about support. Yeah. The number of available substitutes. You're welcome. Yeah.
Elasticity is how readily the amount sold over changes.
The elasticity is the responsiveness of quantity demand to change in price. So you said how readily it changes. I don't like that word. It's not terrible, but it's how responsive it is. The more responsive quantity demand is to change price, the more elastic it is. Yes. Well, the question is elasticity only related to price? Like, we have elasticity for every concept of economics. The only one I'm teaching you is price. We have income elasticity, demand, substitute price elasticity. But I'm teaching you the most important one. It's called own price elasticity. The change in the price of the good in question. What impact does that have on the magnitude of the change in quantity? There's a big impact. You would say it's more elastic than a small impact. That makes sense? Yeah.
Could you repeat number one?
The percentage of consumers' budget or buyers' budget spent on the good.
Thanks.
Okay, so far, when I talk about prices, I just assume the price, put a price up. Just made it up out of my head. We don't know yet where prices come from. We can't know where prices come from until we have an actual market. You can't have an actual market until suppliers and demanders, sellers and buyers meet each other, bargain, and actually make exchanges at certain prices. We saw the demand side of the market, the consumer side of the market. Let's look at the supply side of the market. So you remember that when I introduced demand, I said that the demand curve, the demand, is it's built on the law of diminishing marginal utility. If you were to take this class to almost anyone but me, at this point they would say, and the supply curve is built on something called the law of diminishing marginal returns. There is such a thing. I don't quite believe that, so I don't teach that to you. There is such a thing as the law of diminishing marginal returns. If I had more time in this class, I would teach you the law of diminishing marginal returns. But I've learned over the years that the time it takes me to teach you the law of diminishing marginal returns is not worth it. The marginal cost to me of doing that is not worth the marginal benefit. So I don't do it. I'm just going to start with what we call the law of supply. And it's intuitive, just like the law of demand. So we have, as before, on the horizontal axis, quantity per period of time. On the vertical axis, we have per unit price. And the supply curve looks like that. It slopes in a direction showing a positive connection between quantity and price. This should be just as intuitive as the law of demand. I mean, the intuition behind the law of demand is, well, yeah, if something is more expensive, I'm not willing to buy as much of it. Fewer people are willing to buy it. Put yourself in the position of the seller. The higher the price, the more you're willing to sell. The greater the effort you're willing to put into producing more in order to sell more. The lower the price, not so much. If you don't believe me, ask. Probably most of you have had a job. You're off on the weekend. You get a telephone call at 6 a.m. Saturday morning. You know about that? 6 a.m. Saturday morning, it's your boss. Can you come into work right now? You're off. And your boss, I know you're off. I'm not going to punish you if you don't come in. But what can your boss do to sweeten the deal?
Bonus, extra
Take
money.
time and a half, double time, triple time. How many of you are full-time students? Suppose, I'm not doing this, but suppose I would have come in here and said, all of you full-time students, I have a job for you. It's really easy. You sit at home all day and you just input numbers. Nothing salacious. You input numbers on the computer. And I'll pay you $1 million a year. How many of you would take that job? How many of you would stop being full-time students now? Okay. So the price of something goes up, the quantity supply of something goes up. The price of something falls, the quantity supply of something falls. Those of you who are working, ask what would you do? Not how would you love your job if you went in and your boss says, I know you love this job so much, I'm cutting your wage to 10 cents an hour. You quit. You're not going to keep working at that wage. All other things equal. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supply. We use the same language with supply as we do with demand. We distinguish between quantity supply and supply. And we distinguish between them in the same way that we do on demand curves. So a supply curve shows all the different quantities supplied at different prices. If the price is here at P1, the quantity supplied is here at QS1. The price rises from P1 to P2, quantity supplied rises from QS1 to QS2, and so on. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. The lower the price, the lower the quantity supplied. We call that the law of supply. All other things equal. But as with demand, all other things are not always equal. What determines the position of that supply curve? Or put differently, what might happen that would cause that supply curve to shift out, being an increase in supply, or cause that supply curve to shift in, a decrease in supply? One thing we know, if this is apples, a change in the price of apples will only cause the quantity supplied of apples to change. It will never cause the supply of apples to change. There's a parallel here with demand. But supply, in one way, is a little bit more complicated than demand. Let me pause and review this complexity for you. Supply, all suppliers are current owners of the things that might be sold. Anyone who owns something that can legally be sold is at least a potential supplier of that thing. I own a condominium in Fairfax. I did not build it. I'm not a home builder. I don't make my living building homes or selling homes, but I do own a home. I am a potential supplier of a home. If you offer me a high enough price, I will supply it to you. But that's not my business. I don't actively build homes, purchase homes for resale to make my living. So when we so I just mentioned that. When we talk about supply in here, I'm going to limit, just for simplicity's purpose. It won't change anything fundamental about the economics. But for simplicity, we're going to assume, which is not unrealistic, because it's true in most cases, we're going to assume that suppliers are those individuals who intend to make a living by supplying whatever good or service we're talking about. I own some apples. I have some apples at my place. And potentially I can supply them. You offer me enough money for my apples. You're my apples. That's not why I bought them. I bought the apples to eat. I didn't buy them for resale. When a giant supermarket buys apples, they're not buying them because the giant owners or the giant employees want to eat the apples. They're buying them for the purpose of reselling. When General Motors makes automobiles, it makes automobiles not because its shareholders want to drive those automobiles. General Motors makes automobiles for the purpose of selling automobiles, for the purpose of supplying automobiles to the general public. I own a car. Most of you own a car. You are a potential supplier of a car. But for our purposes in this course, we will not think of you as a potential supplier of a car. We're talking about automobiles. We're talking about Toyota and Nissan and Ford and GM. We're talking about Apple. We're talking about Apple orchard owners or supermarkets. People who produce something in order to resell it. So for us, supply will be intimately connected with production. Intimately connected with production. Some business making a decision about how much of something to produce for resale to consumers. Not to produce to consume themselves, but to produce for resale to consumers. When I say production, let me pause for a moment. When I say production, I don't just mean physical creation of things. That's part of production. When General Motors produces cars, it takes metal, it takes chemicals, it takes plastics, it takes rubber, it takes all sorts of materials, mashes them together, and produces an automobile. Produces a physical thing. But production can also be just, as economists use the term, just transporting things to where they're more convenient for people to get. A retailer doesn't produce anything physically except convenience for consumers. Giant supermarket doesn't produce the apples itself, doesn't produce the broccoli itself, doesn't produce the soup itself, doesn't produce the shampoo itself, doesn't produce any of those things. All it does is buy those things from the people who do produce them and put them in a location that's very convenient for consumers to get to. The supermarkets and most retailers supply convenience of access. For economists, that's production. It's no less production than actually taking a physical thing, combining another physical thing, and producing some physical output. Anything, any activity that adds value to consumers is production. It can be physical manufacturing, but it doesn't have to be. And if you disbelieve me, ask or just imagine how convenient would your life be if all retailers disappeared. You still get food, but you got to drive to the farms yourself. I want apples, I go to the apple orchard. I want grapes, I go to the vineyard. I want broccoli, I go to the vegetable farm. I want fish, Got to drive to the fishing place. It's really inconvenient. What supermarkets do is produce convenience for consumers. Produces one-stop shopping. That's production just as much as the actual growing of the broccoli or distilling of the grapes. Anyway, for our class, when we look at the supply curve, it is going to reflect costs of production. Because for us, suppliers will be producers. So I gave you 6 determinants of demand. There aren't, for a variety of reasons, there are not an easily determinable number of determinants of supply. I'm going to give you one, but it has a couple of parts. For our purposes, there's one determinant of supply, and that is cost of production. Cost of production. Cost of production meaning how much does it cost to produce any given quantity of something. Cost of production. So if that's the supply curve, we'll take a break in about 5 minutes. If that's the supply curve, let's say that QS2 is 100 units. And let's say that P2 is $100. Have to take $100. What that tells us as we read the supply curve is that for suppliers to supply each period a quantity of 100 of these units, whatever this is, the supplier or suppliers have to get paid at least $100 per unit in order to convince them to supply 100 units each period. If the amount that they can sell these units for is something less than $100, the quantity they supply will be less. The intuition here is that if you're a producer, obviously you want to sell anything you produce and make available for sale at a price as high as possible. Giant supermarket would love if you go in and offer them $1 billion for every pound of apples they have for sale. They will not turn you down. You can pay a price high. You can't pay a price lower, but you certainly pay a price high. So let's ask, what is it what's the minimum price a seller, a producer, would have to get for each unit that it produces and makes available for sale in order to persuade that seller to produce that quantity and make that quantity available for sale? The answer is, it has to be a price that covers all of the costs of production. If all of the seller's costs of production are covered for some quantity, like 100, in the price, then the seller is willing to sell it at that price. We'd like to sell it for a price high, of course, but they're willing to sell. So if it costs this seller $100 to produce each of these 100 units, the seller is willing to sell each of these 100 units at a price of $100 a piece. So by cost of production, some of this is obvious. Imagine yourself, you're an apple grower. What are your costs of production? Well, you got to pay labor. You can't produce apples, you need to hire workers. So the wages that you pay your workers, that's part of your costs. The insurance that you have to buy, the fuel you have to buy, the shipping crates that you have to buy, anything you have to purchase in order for you to carry out your business is a cost to you. And you incur that cost, not because you like incurring the cost, you incur the cost because you expect that cost will enable you to better produce, and you'll be able to recover that cost in the price at which you sell the output. That's why you buy shipping crates, that's why you buy insurance, that's why you buy fertilizer for your orchard. But there's another cost. It's really important to keep in mind. And that's your cost as the owner. The cost to you of being the owner of that apple orchard. So suppose that your next best option, you own an apple orchard and you want to make a living selling apples. And let's say that your next best option is you could, say you have a lawyer, you could practice law and earn $200,000 a year. And presumably, and let's say you like apple orcharding and attorneying just as much, and you're indifferent between the two. So you're going to choose which to do, own the apple orchard or be a full-time attorney, depending upon where you expect to make the most money. If you expect that by your devoting your efforts full-time to owning and operating and managing an apple orchard will yield to you an annual income of at least $200,000 or more, you'll own the apple orchard. If instead you believe it will yield to you less income than that, you'll drop the apple orchard and go practice law. In other words, for each business is owned, each business has to pay the cost not only of the workers and the suppliers that supply inputs to the business. Each business has to compensate the owners for being in that line of work. If the owners are not compensated enough to be in that line of work, they will drop that line of work. They'll do something else. Which is to say, if you're a business owner, you might not actually pay yourself. There might not be a line item on your budget. There's a line item in your budget, the amount to pay workers, a line item in the budget, the amount to pay insurance agent, the line item in the budget, the amount to pay for shipping crates, the amount to pay for fertilizer. Maybe not the amount we pay to you, but you're certainly expecting to get paid. You're going to get paid whatever's left over. If the amount that's left over after you pay all your other expenses is too little, you're going to quit. If it's enough, you'll stay in that line of business. There's a cost to you of doing what you do. Your time, your effort is not free. And you have to be, the amount that you earn from operating that business has to be enough to compensate you for being in that business in order for you to stay in that business. Let's take a 6-minute break, and I will continue this. Okay.
Average school when I was in middle school. Sorting. Yeah.
All right. Continuing with supply. Things get at this point in the lecture, I start getting kind of excited because we're getting close to putting supply and demand together, and that's when economics really begins. It's the heart of the course. It's the most important, single most important thing that I'll teach you all semester. We start to spend some time understanding supply. Again, I won't spend as much time on supply as I did demand, but I still have more time to spend on it. So what we're talking about before the break is that the costs that businesses incur, that they have to cover if they are to remain in that line of business. Those costs include not just what's on their expense sheet, the amount they pay their workers, the amount they pay their insurance company, and on and on and on. Those costs include also the owner's costs of doing whatever it is the owners of the business do, incurring the risk in these small businesses actually operating business. Owners have to receive an adequate return in order for them to keep themselves or their assets in that business. If they don't, they quit. Good reason. If you can make $200,000 practicing law, and if you instead are operating an apple orchard and you discover that year after year you're only earning $25,000 for yourself, you're not going to stay as an apple orchard producer very long. You're going to close your apple orchard down, and you're going to start practicing law. Because your cost of being an owner of an apple orchard, is whatever else you could do with your time. The next best alternative you have with your time. If that's practicing law, that's the cost to you of operating an apple orchard. So the owner has to be compensated. We have a funny name for the compensation that owners receive when they operate businesses. A funny thing for what owners receive that's enough, just barely enough to keep them in business. We call that amount normal profit. Normal profit is it's an odd name that you'll see in this moment. Normal profit is a cost to the firm. Normal profit is the cost that the owner of the firm, or the owners, incur in order to remain owners of the firm. It's called as an odd thing because you don't think of profit as a cost. But in this way, economists define it as a cost. You have, again, using this example, when you can earn $200,000 a year practicing law, if you're the owner of the apple orchard, that's your cost of being the owner. And so the profit that has to be left over to you after you pay all your other expenses, in order for you to continue to operate as an apple orchard owner, has to be at least $200,000. If it's $200,000 or more, you stay as an apple orchard owner. If that profit just covers the amount that's necessary for you to continue to operate as an apple orchard owner, that normal profit is a cost to you. It's your cost. It's a name you give to your cost of continuing to operate as the apple orchard owner. We call it this because people mistakenly think that profit is a waste. Profit is not a waste. Profit is what is left over to business owners after they pay all of their expenses. Obviously, the greater the amount that's left over, the higher the amount of profit. And again, if the owner is going to continue in that line of work, the amount left over has to be at least equal to normal profit. It has to be at least equal to the owner's cost of staying in that line of work. But it might be even more, in case the owner's through. People go into business in order to make a profit, in order to at least compensate them for not doing their next best alternative, for not practicing law in this example. But if you make more, let's say you make $300,000 a year, well, you're really happy. The next best alternative is practicing law, in which you earn $200 grand a year. Now you're making $300 grand a year selling apples, producing and selling apples. We say now, in this case, you make above normal profit. Your normal profit is $200,000 that you need to earn as the owner in order to stay operating as the apple orchard owner. But you make even more. You make profit above that, above normal profit. That must mean either that you somehow managed to get the cost to you of selling apples to be really low, so there's a lot more left over to you after you look at your revenue and pay your expenses, or you made your apples really, really valuable. People like your apples so much they're willing to pay a premium for it. That's a good thing for society, not a bad thing. And you're getting rewarded for that in the form of higher profit. The more attractive you make your apples, the tastier, the more lovely your apples are, the higher the price people are willing to pay for them. The greater the value you produce for society. You profit from that. That's true. But that profit is basically a return to you for doing what you do. But when other entrepreneurs look at your above normal profit, wow, she's making a lot of profit selling apples. That's like catnip to entrepreneurs. It's an incentive for people doing other things, producing other things, to move into the apple producing business, to compete with you. And as we'll see, that will cause the price of apples to fall and cause your profit to fall down to normal. Let me give you another term before we get back to the supply curve itself. The term is called, it's a fancy term, but it's a really useful one. The concept is very useful. It's called residual claimant. Two words, residual, R-E-S-I-D-U-A-L, residual claimant, C-L-A-I-M-A-N-T, residual claimant. An owner is a residual claimant. The owner of a firm has a claim on what's left over after all expenses are paid. There's a claim on the residual. You own an apple orchard, let's say your total revenue this year is $1 million. You have to pay your workers a certain amount, pay your insurance agent a certain amount, pay a certain amount for the land, pay all that in dollars. And you're contractually bound to pay that. You got to pay it. You keep what's left over. You claim what's left over. You are the residual claim. What you get is the difference between total revenue and all of your costs that you have to pay. And again, if what's left over that you can claim is just equal to the amount necessary to keep you in that line of business, we say that you earn normal profit. If you earn more than that, you earn above normal profit. And that above normal profit will attract other people into that line of work. One of the great benefits of ownership, the great benefit not just to the owners, but for society, is that being a residual claimant gives the owners an incentive to operate efficiently. You want to keep your costs as low as possible if you're the owner, Because you get to claim the difference. If you can cut your cost of producing 100 units, you get to claim the difference. It goes to you. It adds to your profit. You have an incentive to do that. If you can make your product more attractive to consumers so that they are willing to pay a higher price, it's obviously good for consumers. It's more attractive to them. You're eager to do that because you claim the difference between your cost of doing that and whatever is the amount of revenue you get from doing that. So owners are residual claimants. After all expenses paid, owners get what remains. If what remains is too little, owners leave. They quit. They do something else. Because they're getting below normal profits. If they get normal profit or more, if they compensate themselves for what they otherwise could, or more than that, they stay in that line of work. The supply curve shows the cost to the owners of producing any given quantity along the horizontal axis. So in this example, it cost this firm $100 to produce each of these 100 units. We know that because the firm is willing to produce and sell 100 units if the firm can get $100 for each of those 100 units. If it can't get $100 as a sales price of each of those 100 units, it's not willing to produce that now. It'll produce fewer. If it can get a higher price, it's willing to produce more. So back to the main line. There's one determinant of cost of production. That's one determinant of supply. That is cost of production. And the rule is this. The higher is cost of production, the lower is supply. The lower is cost of production, the higher is supply. Somebody keep that sheet up and draw another supply curve. So suppose cost of production fall, for whatever reason. It now costs the owner less to produce each of those 100 units than it does with this supply curve. Now it costs the owner to produce 100 units, $100 a piece. If it now costs the owner less than that to produce 100 units, then the owner will be willing to sell 100 units at some price less than $100. And that would be true for any quantity you choose. So as cost of production fall, supply increases. As cost of production fall, supply increases. The intuition here is really simple. The cost you less to produce something, for any given price, you're willing to supply more of it. Alternatively, if cost of production rise, supply decreases. So the lower is cost of production, let's say the lower R cost of production, the further to the right is the supply curve. The higher the cost of production, the further to the left is the supply curve. Cost of production fall, sellers are willing to sell ever more at the same price. Even you are old enough to know what happened to the price of a lot of consumer electronics in the last 10 or 15 years. When you were a toddler, consumer electronics were less costly than they were 10 years before, but they were a lot more costly than they are today. Over the years, the cost of producing consumer electronics has fallen, so the supply is going way up. For any given price, people will simply produce the one supply a lot more. Or for any given quantity, you need that quantity at a lot lower price than you did before. So there's only one determinant of supply is cost of production. But now we want to look at what determines cost of production. This has several components. I'm not going to give you all of them, but I'll give you the important ones. Number one, again, not this is most important, this is the ones that I give you. The prices of inputs. The prices of inputs is a determinative cost of production. The price you have to pay to your workers. The cost to you of buying insurance. Cost to you of renting land if you're an apple orchard. The prices that you have to pay for these things will obviously determine the cost of production. The wages that you have to pay to your workers fall, and now you can produce any quantity of something at a lower cost because you're getting the same workers, but you're paying a lower wage. The cost of production falls. So you're now willing to supply more at any given price. If the wages that you pay your workers rise, your cost of production rise. Now I got to pay the same workers that you were paying yesterday $20 an hour, I got to pay them $25 an hour. Same labor, now you got to pay more for it. Cost of production rise, supply falls. So if input prices, including labor, change, that changes cost of production. If input prices rise, it causes cost of production to rise, it causes supply to fall. Let me pause and just tell you a word about how to read these graphs to avoid confusion. It doesn't matter much with demand, although you should apply what I'm about to say to demand as well as supply. But it does matter for supply. Always read supply and demand curves in the left-right dimension. So always read them as whether a curve is further to the right or to the left. As opposed to reading them up and down. This supply curve, S prime, represents a higher supply than does this supply curve. And you can see that if you're reading the curves in this dimension. Because S prime is further out than is curve S. But if you're careless and you're reading them in a vertical dimension, you say, oh, well, supply curve S prime is below supply curve S. This must be a lower supply. You don't want to slip into that confusion. You don't want to read these curves up and down. You always want to read them left and right. And the rule is always the further to the right, the higher the supply or higher the demand. The further to the left, the lower the supply or lower the demand. So cost of price of inputs is one determinant of cost of production. Technology is a second determinant of cost of production. Technology is the word, at least in economics, that we use for the knowledge that we have about how to transform inputs into outputs. Better technology means we have better knowledge about how to transform inputs into outputs. We can take the same amount of input and get more output from it. Or alternatively, we can get the same amount of output using fewer inputs. Pay less to get that same amount of output. So as technology improves, costs of production fall, and hence supply rises. I'm going to leave it at that. So, there's one determinant of supply, that's cost of production. And there are two determinants of cost of production. The price of inputs, including the cost, the price that the owner has to pay himself or herself to stay in that line of work. So the price of inputs and technology. Any change in those will cause cost of production to change. Change in cost of production, in turn, will be reflected in the movement of the supply curve. Once again, the lower cost, as cost of production fall, supply increases, the supply curve shifts to the right. As cost of production rise, supply falls, supply curve shifts to the left. As with, yeah. About what? Price of inputs. So the two determinant, cost of production is the only determinant of supply that we're talking about. There are two determinants of cost of production: price of inputs and technology. Got it? So, as with demand, as I said before the break, we distinguish between changes in quantity supply and changes in supply. A change in quantity supply is always a movement along a given supply curve, and it's always caused and only caused by a change in the price of the good in question. So whatever good this is, quantity supply will change only when the price changes. Higher price, higher quantity supply; lower price, lower quantity supply. A change in supply is never caused by a change in the price of the good in question. A change in supply is caused by a change in the cost of production, and only by a change in cost of production, which again can be caused either by a change in price of inputs or a change in technology. A shifting of the supply curve, we call that a change in supply. A movement along the supply curve, we call that a change in quantity supply. So that distinction between changes in supply and changes in quantity supply is perfectly parallel to the distinction with demand that we drew between changes in demand and changes in quantity. Finally, really briefly, there is such a thing as elasticity of supply, but it's nowhere nearly as important as elasticity of demand. And let me just show you quickly. We have two supply curves, S1 and S2. Both of those satisfy the law of supply: higher price, higher quantity supply. But obviously, S2 is different than S1. S2 is more elastic than S1. Along S2, any given change in price is going to cause a larger change in quantity supply than happens along S1. I just want to alert you to quantity supply as a thing. At the very end of the semester, when the weather is going to be cold and you'll be thinking about Thanksgiving or Christmas, we're going to look at the elasticity of supply as it impacts what's called the incidence of taxation. But I want to raise it for you now. It's a thing, but it's nowhere nearly as important as elasticity of demand. That's why I'm not going to spend any more time on it. Now we get, finally, to the heart of the course. We look at theory of consumer behavior, demand, we look at a supply side of the market, and put them together. Not surprisingly, we have supply and demand curve together. And that's what we get. Every time I draw this, and I'm drawing thousands, tens of thousands of these, I get these. We get excited. That's the supply and demand curve. Probably one of the most famous and useful, very simple analytical devices in all of the social sciences. It's a tool for us to think, to help us understand reality. It's not reality itself. It's a tool that we use to help us understand reality. It's demand and supply. Can you see up here any price that looks unique? Where the supply curve intersects the demand curve? Yes, that's. Someone could say zero. Zero actually is not a unique price. There are a lot of things in our lives that have negative prices. Garbage, negative price. You pay people to take it away from you. It's a negative price. That's what economists think of those things. There's nothing special about zero, although this price right here, the price that corresponds to the intersection of these two curves, is special. And we'll see why. He first named it. We call it the equilibrium price. Because at that, we call it that for a number of reasons. One reason is that at that price, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal to each other. At no other price. A price higher than that, price lower than that. At no other price are quantity demanded and quantity supplied equal to each other. That's one reason we call it that price, where the intersection of the two curves occurs. One reason why we call it an equilibrium price. We'll see later another reason why we call it an equilibrium price. Not a competing reason, just a different reason. They complement each other. In a way, my drawing this down, showing the equilibrium price, is to give you the end of the story. But it's something to keep in mind. But it's the end of the story. It's not the beginning. What we want to understand is what, again, I want to build up, and I'm going to use a real world example here next week. This theory of price that I'm telling you about, it's only good if it makes you go, oh, now I better, B-E-T-T-E-R, understand the world I live in. And that'll be true only if this can explain what we know about real world prices. And I'm going to use lots of examples about those. Before we get to real world examples, we've got to do the analytics. And I'm stuck with this horrible classroom. Just a terrible classroom, actually. So I'm stuck with drawing this stuff up here. So again, this is the end point. We're going to see that price settles into here. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is, why does it settle into there? What happens to get it there? What's the process that takes place in the market to get price there? So here's how we think about it. Suppose the price is above equilibrium. Let's say it's here. pH or high. What do we know then about price at pH? Well, price at pH, quantity supplied is here, quantity demanded is here. So sellers want to sell more than buyers want to buy. We're going to rule out violence. We're going to rule out sellers being able to put a gun to buyers' heads and say, buy more. All activity here is going to be voluntary, consensual. When price is above equilibrium, as I said, quantity supplied is greater than quantity. That's what economists mean by a surplus. When we use the term surplus, that's all we mean. It's the excess of quantity supplied over quantity demanded, brought about by price being above equilibrium. So at price at pH, the difference between quantity supplied, quantity demanded, is a surplus. Sellers go to market thinking they can sell QS at price pH. That's what they thought they could do. They get to market and they're disappointed. They can't sell all that they want to sell. They can sell some, they can sell QD, but they can't sell more. You're a seller, what do you do? You can fall on your knees and plead. Right? But please buy more of my good. That's probably not going to yield good long-run strategy. If you're a supermarket manager, you aren't going to want to go if you're falling on your knees and pleading with them to pay more. What do? You're making it too complicated. You're making it complicated. You want to sell more. I appreciate your English. No, you can't use the go. We're moving that out. Yeah. You cut the price. Because you understand. You don't need to take an economics course. You understand. If you cut the price, that makes whatever you're selling more attractive. So you cut the price a little bit. You're not cutting the price because you love consumers. You're cutting the price because you love yourself. But consumers are benefiting. Because when you cut the price, you can't compel consumers to buy what you're selling. You cut the price, you understand that that's going to make what you're selling more attractive part. As you cut the price, that does two things. The most obvious thing is cut the price. Let's say it's cut to here. It's going to increase quantity demand. It's going to make some consumers who are not willing to buy at the higher price willing to buy at the lower price. It's going to make some people who are willing to buy some at the higher price, willing to buy even more at the lower price. So quantity supply is going to rise. At the same time, quantity demand is going to rise. At the same time, quantity supply is going to fall. At a lower price, some sellers who are willing to sell at the higher price no longer are willing to sell at the lower price. So they leave the market. But if the price is cut only to here, let's say, we still have a surplus. Sellers are still disappointed. They still find that they can't sell all that they want to sell. So they continue to cut prices. They continue to cut prices until price is at PE. When price hits PE, then sellers no longer have an incentive to cut prices. Buyers might go up to them and say, you were cutting prices before, keep cutting it. Sellers say, no, we're not going to cut them any further because now we can sell everything we want to sell at price PE. We no longer are disappointed. We no longer have unexpected inventories that we can't sell. So that's the second reason we call PE an equilibrium price. It means that the sellers, as we'll see later, also the buyers, are in equilibrium. They no longer want to change. No, we're good. No more need to cut prices. We're selling all we want to sell. And you go to the supermarket. So I said this last week, I'll remind you again. The Giant puts the paper towels on sale. It's not because they love you. They'll tell you that. It's because they want to sell more paper towels. You benefit from it. Sure. But Giant benefits from it too. They're not giving you a gift. So when prices above equilibrium, it's a surplus. Sellers find themselves disappointed. They can't sell all they want to sell. They cut price as a means of selling more. Price continues to be cut until the price falls to PE. When price is at PE, the equilibrium price has no further incentive to cut prices. Price settles here. What if price is below equilibrium? Draw another one. Let's say the price is at PL. That PL, quantity demanded, is greater than quantity supply. Economists call that a shortage. When economists use the term shortage, that's all we mean. It's the excess of quantity demanded over quantity supplied as a result of price being below equilibrium. At price PL, buyers want to buy this much, that's a really good price. Sellers only want to sell that much, however. Buyers can't compel sellers to sell more. Just as we rule out violence of sellers forcing buyers to buy, we rule out violence of buyers forcing sellers to sell. In both cases, it's called robbery. We rule out robbery. But we have a problem that's very similar to the problem we had before. We have people in the market who are disappointed. Buyers went to the market thinking they could buy QD amount, and they're disappointed. Put yourself in the buyer's position. I want to get QD amount, but I can't. How might you improve your prospects of getting? So some is going to be sold. QS is going to be sold. At this price, this is quantity supplied, so there'll be some that's supplied to buyers. Buyers will be able to buy that amount, but they want to buy that amount. This amount is what buyers want to buy that they can't find. You're a buyer. You want to improve your prospects of being among the buyers who get that limited quantity that's available for sale. What do? What do you do? You're a buyer. What do you do? You can't get it, right? You worry that you like that company, you like this pretty attractive price, but you don't think you're going to be one of the lucky buyers to get it. You're going to be one of the unlucky buyers who goes on empty-handed. So you might offer someone a higher price. I'll pay a few pennies more. Well, that makes it more attractive to sell to you. All buyers feel the same way. Buyers bid the price up. Not because they love sellers. I feel sorry for this seller. Let me go for a higher price. No. Buyers bid the price up because each buyer wants to improve his or her chances of being among the lucky buyers that gets what's available for sale. As buyers bid the price up, two things happen. Quantity demanded falls. Well, at that price, I'm not willing to buy it, say some buyers. Some buyers are willing to continue to buy some, but not as much as before. As price rises, quantity demanded falls. That makes sense, right? Also, quantity supply rises. Price goes up. Some people who are not willing to sell before enter the market. They're willing to sell this good now. Existing suppliers are willing to supply even more. So as buyers bid the price up, price goes up. Quantity demanded falls, quantity supply rises, the shortage decreases. But as long as there's a shortage, buyers still have an incentive to bid the price up. You can look at this also from the perspective of the seller. If you're a seller and you're charging the price of PL, and you're surprised at how many people want to buy your good. You look out the window, there's a long line of people waiting to buy your good. You realize you don't have as many goods to sell as there are customers to buy. So you raise the price. You're aware that if you raise the price, that's going to cause some of those people who are waiting in line to leave the line, but you don't care. As long as there's enough people left who are willing to buy your good, you're going to raise the price. When price is below equilibrium, price gets bid up to the equilibrium. Whenever there's a shortage, buyers have an incentive to bid the price up. Sellers have an incentive to raise the price. And that keeps happening until price hits the equilibrium level. And when it hits the equilibrium level, it stops. It no longer rises. Buyers now say, oh, we're good. We don't have to raise, we don't have to bid a high price anymore. We're happy. No longer need to change price. Yeah.
So when there's a surplus,
the question is whether there's a surplus or a shortage. Does this involve a loss of income for the seller? Not necessarily. Could, but not necessarily. All that matters for us, and what is necessary to happen, what does always happen, is when price is not at equilibrium, there is either a surplus or a shortage, depending on whether it's above or below equilibrium. And when it's above or below equilibrium, that reality itself sets in motion market forces to move the price down, the price is above equilibrium, to move the price up, if it's above equilibrium. That's all it matters. Okay? Everyone with me? So if you think of PE, equilibrium price, think like a magnet. It's not really a magnet. You gotta think of it that way. Price above equilibrium, it sucks it down. Below equilibrium, it pulls it up. Wherever those two curves intersect, economists assume that if price is not there yet, that's where price will go. So when we look at the real world and we see some prices, our first assumption is that, well, it's probably an equilibrium price. That price is there because that's where the supply and demand intersect. And if we see price changing, we'll look at that next week, we attribute that to changes in supply and demand. Without getting a little bit ahead of myself. So that is the first cut. We're going to take many, many more. That's the simplest and most direct explanation of prices. Given some supply, given some demand, I guess this is demand from your perspective, supply from your perspective, where they intersect, that intersection will determine what the price of that good will be. Let me, what I'm going to start doing is shifting these curves around. And that'll be the next cut we take at the next time. But before I do that, let me point out another interesting feature of the equilibrium price. One of the few things I miss about an actual chalkboard. I don't know if you all know what chalk is. It's a sticky substance. It's good for honey. But I used to teach with chalk. You just take a piece of chalk and turn it on the side and make a thick line to show you how to do it. You can't do that now. Even with a whiteboard, you can't do that. But what I'm going to show you up here is a unique property of the equilibrium price. Here's the question I want you to ask yourselves. Now, let's ask all the different prices from down here to up here. We imagine all the different prices. And if we ask at each price, what is the amount or the quantity that consumers actually get at that quantity? We're going to trace out a curve that shows the amount that consumers actually get at each quantity. Not the amount consumers want to get, not the amount they could get but don't get. The amount they actually get. What's the amount that's actually transferred from sellers to buyers? Here's what I mean. So at PL, what's the amount consumers actually get when if price is down? Well, they want to get this amount. They're willing to buy that amount. But they don't get that amount. They get only this amount. Because that's the maximum amount that's the amount that sellers are willing to sell at price PL, QS. So at price PL, consumers get QS amount. What's the amount consumers actually get, if the price is up here at PH? Well, they could get this amount. That's the quantity supply. They could get this amount. That's not the amount they actually get. The amount they actually get is the amount they want to buy, which is this amount. We ask for each of these prices, what's the amount of this good or service that consumers actually get? At pH, it's this amount. At some price a little bit lower than pH. Well, they could get this amount, the quantity supply, but they don't want to buy that amount. So they're not going to buy that amount. They're going to buy only this amount. So they actually get this amount. We do that for every price. High prices, low prices, we can trace out the following curve. It's the amount, it's the very eloquently named amount consumers actually get curve. And it looks like this. It's that thick line, sideways V, it's a greater than sign. That's the amount consumers actually get curve. That curve shows not the amount consumers want to get, but don't. The amount that they can get, but don't. It's the amount they actually get, the amount that's actually transferred from buyers and sellers to buyers. And what we see is that the amount consumers actually get is at its highest at the equilibrium price. At the equilibrium price, they get called, not surprisingly, the equilibrium quantity. The equilibrium quantity is not as important as equilibrium price. It's price theory. We call it the equilibrium quantity. At any price above or below the equilibrium price, the amount consumers actually get, the amount that is actually transferred from sellers to buyers, is less. The reason is, if the price falls below equilibrium, while buyers want to buy more, they have to settle for buying less because the quantity of supply falls. So the consumers get less if the price falls below equilibrium. If the price rises above equilibrium, consumers can get more because sellers are eager to sell more than that. But buyers want to buy less. That price is above equilibrium, then they want to buy at equilibrium. So the amount consumers actually get falls whenever price rises above or falls below the equilibrium level. That's another neat feature of the equilibrium price. When price is at equilibrium, the amount consumers actually get is at its peak. Any price higher or lower results in consumers getting less of the product. To the extent that markets, the purpose of a market is to bring goods and services to consumers, then that's another nice feature of the equilibrium price. That's the price at which consumers get most of what the market's supposed to do. What we're going to do, because I am out of paper to draw on, next week, so we'll you mind if we quit a little bit early tonight?
Yes. Yes. It's fine.
I'm not done quite yet. Not done quite yet. Here's what we're going to do next week. We're going to look at what happens when supply and demand changes. Because we want to understand why prices in the real world change. So I'm going to shift the demand curve out and in. I'm going to shift the supply curve out and in. We're going to look what happens. And we're going to see if the results of changes in price and the changes in quantity make some kind of sense. I'll argue that they do. Well, at least give you the economist reasons for understanding that the results make sense. Then when we're done with that, we're going to look at a real-world example, the first of many real-world examples of price changes. Let me tell you what that real-world example is, so I don't have to waste so much time next week going over it. We're actually very fortunate this fall. As you probably know, this has been an unusually mild hurricane season. Probably won't be so mild next year. Here's what happens every year when a natural disaster strikes, such as a hurricane. It can be a blizzard, it can be a tornado, it can be an earthquake, it can be a tsunami, any severe natural disaster. Here's what happens. And everybody knows it. The prices of some goods go way up, then they eventually fall back down. I'm from New Orleans, my hometown is New Orleans, and you may remember, like right around the time you were all Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans. It was very devastating. I was only here at the time. but I had family in New Orleans. Prices, what prices of plywood, prices of propane, prices of bottled water, prices of blankets, went through the roof. This happens whenever natural disasters strike. What we know, no one disputes, is the following pattern. Natural disaster hits, prices skyrocket, prices go up. The extent to which they go up depends upon how severe the natural disaster is. Then, prices fall back down to pretty much where they were before. And the speed at which they fall back down depends upon how severe the natural disaster was. If the theory of price that I am building for you now makes any sense, it should be able to explain that pattern of prices. At least it should be able to explain it better than any other theory that is used to explain those price changes. We'll look at some other theories, or at least one other major theory that's used to explain those price changes. We'll compare it to what economics has to say about it. I'll see you all this week.
I would say there's like, no, we had like 100 people here. There's like maybe 100. I would let yeah, but I mean, he records it. And like, the only thing, like, I guess you would have missed the project that I've already fucking